Friends, my name is Denise Carey, and I titled my presentation Building Word Level Bridges, Morphological Analysis, and Verbal Scaffolding for Adolescent Readers. Over the next few minutes, I will walk you through the work that I did with my tutee this term. I will tell you about two of the research-based strategies that I used consistently across all 10 of our sessions, and I will share a little bit about the progress that I made with him. So my student was Mo. He is a 7th grader, and his ELA teacher forwarded me his FastBridge scores um, ahead of my tutoring sessions with him, and they placed him at the 41st percentile. When I began working with him, his profile started to reveal something interesting, that he's a strong thinker who struggles to show it on paper. So some of the surveys and different basic reading inventories that I did with him at first showed that his inferential and evaluative comprehension were solid across every passage that we read together. And his oral reading fluency was steady between 109 and 125 words per minute. But his vocabulary in context was something different. So during reading, Mo would skip unfamiliar words entirely or guess based on their shape. He read in one of our first sessions, he read the word psychologist as physiologist, and he did it with so much confidence that I nearly missed that he was making an error. And he skipped the word stigmatization altogether. So his spelling inventory placed him at the middle to late syllables and affixes stage, and his writing attitude was overwhelmingly negative. He told me that he always felt behind when he writes papers, and that his written responses consistently underrepresented what he could express verbally. So as you can see in the diagnostic profile to the right, his vocabulary subskills were his weakest area of the 4 different areas that I looked at, with his word part analysis and word skipping starting at emerging and not yet observed. So those 2 sub-skill areas became my priority as far as instructional target. Strategy was morphological analysis through developmental word study. Bears demonstrate, sort, reflect, extend, cycle gave me a structured framework, and Spear-Swerling's work on structured literacy reinforced that without morphological knowledge, students cannot reach advanced levels of word recognition and vocabulary. So the rationale that I used for this strategy with Mo was easy for me. He was treating words as shapes to guess rather than as systems of meaningful word parts. So he needed to learn how to see the pieces inside of the word and use them, and maybe slow down a little bit. So we worked on slowing down his reading some when he came across some of the longer words also. I implemented this strategy across all 5 lessons, and you can see the progression at the bottom of the slide. In lesson 1, he sorted derivational suffixes at 94% accuracy, and afterward he was able to break down stigmatization into its base and suffix and define it in context, which he couldn't do before the sort. So in lesson 2, he sorted unaccented final syllables at 100%, but here is where the recognition over production gap showed up. He could sort the patterns visually with perfect accuracy, but he could not produce those same spellings from memory in his own writing. So lesson 3, he was making cross-session vocabulary connections, and he recognized the word disembodied from a previous lesson and broke it apart using the dis prefix on his own. So in lesson 4, he started self-selecting vocabulary words during the reading I noted it as a new behavior that he did without being prompted because he did it during the reading without being prompted, but I did instruct him at the beginning of the reading that I wanted him to look for unfamiliar words or words that he felt that we should go over together on his own, and he did. So he also, in lesson 5, his context-based definitions were matching dictionary definitions, even when his morphological breakdown was incomplete, which told me that his context clues were emerging as his stronger strategy. And I think pointing out the footnotes at the bottom of the page, which sometimes gave definitions, and constantly referring to those. I used a lot of Common Lit articles for our readings together. I think by pointing out those footnotes at the bottom, it helped engage him in wanting to know what the definitions were and making more sense of those words in context. My second strategy was verbal first scaffolding for written expression. It was grounded in ILA's research advisory on writing and in Frankel and Brooks' argument that instruction should build from the strengths readers already possess. So Mo's strength, as I pointed out earlier, was his verbal expression. He could talk through ideas with clarity and detail. But when I asked him to write about an informational article using a problem solution structure, his first written response without any scaffolding was one vague sentence with no text evidence and no specific details. So it was a pretty glaring gap. So the bottom of this slide shows what happened in lesson 5 when I introduced the verbal first approach. For the part 1 of the prompt, he wrote without verbalizing at first, and the result was that there was one single vague sentence. And for parts 2 and 3, I had him talk through his answer before writing it down. The difference was dramatic. I mean, he produced multiple sentences, named specific solutions from the article, and for the first time in all 10 of our sessions together, he pulled a direct quote from the text as evidence on his own. And I was really excited to see that. So the strategy also revealed something important. During the third part, Mo lost his thought while transitioning from speaking to writing. He had the answer and couldn't remember it, and needed to verbalize it a second time before he could finish writing. So that told me that the bottleneck wasn't a comprehension issue. It was his working memory load during the shift from speaking to writing. If I had targeted planning strategies or graphic organizers alone, I would have addressed the wrong part of the process. So it was lucky that we did it that way. The chart on the left shows the 4 sub-skills that moved from baseline to the final session. Word part analysis moved from emerging to developing. Word skipping avoidance moved from not yet observed to emerging. Text structure awareness and figurative language interpretation both moved from emerging to developing. None of these reached mastery, and I want to be honest about that. So 10 sessions, I think we've discussed this, and Dr. Massey has discussed this. There's not enough time to close all the gaps entirely. But the trajectory is in the right direction, and I'm proud of that, and I know that my 2T was proud of that. I showed him some of his upward trajectory, and we both saw that as successful. So my key conclusions are that morphological analysis does transfer to comprehension when it's scaffolded, that context clues turned out to be Mo's stronger vocabulary strategy over pure morphology, and that verbal first scaffolding unlocked written production that actually matched his verbal ability, and that his self-selection of vocabulary words during reading was a new independent behavior that emerged over the course of our work together. It's my opinion that I noticed that the students in my district really don't start working with morphology until they reach the junior high level more consistently. And I think that if that was introduced to them and worked more consistently between fourth, fifth, and sixth grade, before they get to junior high, it would come a little bit easier to them. And then it would also set them up for success when they get to high school and they're working with more disciplinary specific vocabulary, like what they'll see in science, in social studies, in math, and all the things. So for recommendations, I would say any teacher working with a student like Mo should continue verbal rehearsal before all writing tasks and fade the scaffolding gradually. So teach context clues as the lead vocabulary strategy and use morphology as confirmation rather than the other way around. I would add encoding practice like spelling from dictation to bridge the recognition over production gap. And I would use text structure as a bridge from reading into writing, which is something that worked well for Mo in our later sessions. So the quote at the bottom captures what I kept coming back to throughout this practicum, throughout this experience. The gap between scaffolded and independent performance is the central instructional target. My references are listed here. Thank you for taking the time to view my poster, and I look forward to reading your feedback and seeing your posters.